My daughter wanted to move into my house. When I refused, her husband hurled a heavy oak chair directly at my chest. The wood struck my jaw, splitting my skin. "You are so selfish," my daughter screamed, watching the blood drip onto my collared shirt. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a punch. I picked up my keys, drove myself to the emergency room, and let the doctors stitch my face. While sitting on the cold hospital bed, I pulled out my phone and texted my attorney. I wrote that phase 1 was complete. 2 hours later, the illusion of their control evaporated entirely. My name is Dwayne. I am 70 years old, and I spent my entire life building a legacy for a family that viewed me as nothing more than an expiring bank account. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now, let me tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect lie. The heavy thud of designer luggage hitting the hardwood floor shattered the quiet of my Sunday morning. I stood in the foyer of my home, a house I had meticulously maintained for 40 years, and watched my only daughter, Monique, drag 3 massive suitcases over the threshold. Her husband, Tariq, followed closely behind her. Tariq was a tall, broad-shouldered white man who wore expensive linen suits paid for entirely by my daughter's severely overdrawn credit cards. They did not knock. They did not ring the doorbell or ask for permission to enter my sanctuary. Monique crossed her arms and looked around the space with a highly critical eye. She immediately began mentally rearranging the furniture I had kept in perfect order since her mother passed away. She announced in a sharp, uncompromising tone that they were moving in effective immediately. She claimed my advancing age required strict round-the-clock supervision. She stated that living alone at 70 years old was a severe hazard, and she was stepping in to manage my daily routine for my own good. Tariq nodded in agreement, leaning against the doorframe with a deeply arrogant smirk. He informed me that they had already arranged for contractors to arrive on Monday morning. They planned to completely convert my ground-floor study into their new luxury master suite. He dictated their terms with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he held all the power in the room. They fully expected me to simply hand over the keys to my kingdom and quietly retreat into the shadows of my own house. They fundamentally misunderstood the man standing in front of them. I looked at the 2 intruders occupying my foyer and refused to yield an inch of my territory. I maintained a perfectly even, controlled tone. I informed Monique and Tariq that they were not moving in today, tomorrow, or ever. I instructed them to pick up their luggage, turn around, and exit my property immediately. My refusal hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Tariq's arrogant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a dark, volatile rage. His entitlement, frustrated by my firm boundary, boiled over into sudden, explosive violence. He lunged toward the dining room adjacent to the hallway. He grabbed one of the heavy, solid oak chairs from the table and hurled it directly at me with all his physical strength. The heavy wood slammed brutally into my chest, and the rigid backrest violently clipped my jaw. The sheer force of the impact knocked me backward, pinning me against the hallway wall. I tasted bitter copper as the skin on my face split wide open. Warm blood immediately began to stream down my cheek and neck, soaking deeply into the crisp collar of my pristine white shirt. I stayed on my feet, breathing heavily, staring directly at the man who had just viciously assaulted a 70-year-old man in his own home. Monique did not rush to my aid. She did not scream at her husband or admonish him for his brutal attack. Instead, she stepped right over the shattered pieces of the wooden chair and shouted directly into my bleeding face. She called me a profoundly selfish old man who was hoarding wealth while his own flesh and blood struggled to survive. She accused me of being a terrible, unfeeling father who cared more about a dusty, empty house than the financial and emotional survival of his only child. She openly justified the horrific violence as a perfectly natural reaction to my stubborn cruelty. She declared that I deserved the physical blow for daring to deny them what they rightfully deserved. She demanded I hand over my keys immediately and accept my new reality. She told me my days of making decisions were completely over. I did not raise a hand to wipe the blood from my face. I looked down at the splintered leg of the oak dining chair resting near my work boots. I bought that exact dining set 30 years ago with the very first major profit payout from my regional freight company. I started that business with a single used truck and built it into a highly lucrative logistics empire spanning across the Midwest. I secured my wealth through decades of grueling physical labor on the loading docks, countless sleepless nights, and relentless financial discipline. I deliberately masked my massive success behind a very modest lifestyle, driving a reliable older truck and wearing simple, unbranded clothing. I chose a quiet, unassuming existence specifically to protect my family and myself from this exact breed of venomous greed. I desperately wanted Monique to develop a strong, independent work ethic, rather than an expectation of inherited luxury. Seeing the physical manifestation of my early success weaponized against me clarified everything. My daughter and her husband saw me merely as a vault waiting to be cracked open. I did not argue with my daughter. I did not physically engage with the violent man standing triumphantly in my hallway. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my car keys, and walked out the front door without uttering a single word of protest. I drove myself directly to the local hospital emergency room, the blood steadily soaking through my clothes and staining the leather seat of my truck. The attending triage nurse took one look at my split jaw and immediately recognized the distinct, undeniable pattern of blunt force trauma. She demanded to call the local police department right then and there to report a severe domestic assault. She prepared her clipboard to document the exact nature of my injuries for law enforcement records. I firmly refused her request. I looked the nurse directly in the eye and explicitly told her that I had simply tripped over a loose rug and fallen hard against a piece of sharp furniture. She frowned deeply, clearly doubting my fabricated story, but she had absolutely no choice but to stitch my face and officially file the injury as an accidental fall. As the medical needle pierced my skin, I pulled out my phone with a remarkably steady hand. I sent a brief, highly encrypted text message to my corporate attorney, Mr. Holloway. I typed that Phase 1 was completely successful and we were fully ready to proceed with the operation. Any normal man would have filed immediate criminal charges to put his attacker behind bars. I chose a completely different, far more destructive path. I needed Tariq and Monique to feel absolutely untouchable. I needed them to believe they had broken my spirit and conquered my home without consequence. The terrifying question remained of why a bleeding, immensely wealthy man would actively protect the monster who assaulted him. I stepped back into my own foyer 2 hours later. The sharp sting of the fresh black stitches pulling tight across my jaw mirrored the cold reality of my new situation. The house I had maintained for 40 years, the sanctuary I had built with my own hands, felt entirely different now. It felt breached. I walked into the living room and found Tariq sprawled across my custom leather sofa. He held a crystal tumbler filled to the brim with my 20-year-old single malt scotch. He did not flinch when I entered the room. He did not offer an apology or even a flicker of remorse for the brutal violence he had just inflicted upon me. He simply raised the glass toward me in a silent, arrogant toast. He radiated the absolute victory of a predator who firmly believed the hunt was successfully concluded. Monique stood by the bay windows overlooking the front lawn. She completely ignored the thick white bandages taped to my bleeding face. She did not inquire what the emergency room doctors had said about my fractured jaw. Instead, she ran a manicured finger along the windowsill and complained loudly about the thin layer of dust gathering on the curtains. She announced that the house required a deep professional cleaning before any of her high society friends could visit. Her complete disregard for my physical condition was far more chilling than the strike of the wooden chair. She looked at me not as a wounded father, but as a negligent property manager who was failing to meet her aesthetic standards. I remained standing near the entryway, keeping my breathing perfectly even and my expression entirely blank. I knew any display of anger would only validate their twisted sense of superiority. They needed to believe they had completely broken my will. They needed to feel completely unopposed in their conquest of my home to take the next fatal step. Tariq set his empty crystal glass heavily on the mahogany coffee table. He stood up, towering over me, and smoothed the lapels of his wrinkled linen suit. He confidently crossed the room and positioned himself directly in my personal space, actively attempting to use his physical size to enforce his dominance. He extended an open, expectant palm toward my chest. He firmly demanded the combination and the brass keys to the heavy floor safe located inside my home office. He claimed he needed immediate access to organize my upcoming medical bills and manage my rapidly declining financial responsibilities. The lie was so blatantly transparent, it bordered on insulting. He had absolutely no intention of paying a single medical bill. He wanted the property deeds, the vehicle titles, and the lucrative account routing numbers he assumed were locked inside. He fully expected a physical fight. He braced his broad shoulders, clearly preparing to use extreme force again if I offered even the slightest verbal resistance. I did not argue with him. I did not demand an explanation or desperately defend my cognitive capability. I calmly reached into my trousers and retrieved the heavy brass key from my pocket. I placed it directly into his waiting palm. Tariq stared at the key, momentarily disoriented by my complete lack of resistance. His temporary confusion quickly morphed into a profound, ugly smirk. He genuinely believed my sudden submission was absolute. He thought the heavy blow to my jaw had effectively terrorized me into surrendering my entire life's work without a legal battle. He pocketed the key with a theatrical flourish, turned his back to me, and marched straight down the hall toward my private office. Monique offered me a highly patronizing nod, congratulating me for finally being reasonable and making things easier for everyone involved. She followed her husband down the corridor, her designer heels clicking a victorious rhythm against the polished floorboards. I stood alone in the living room, listening to the heavy oak door of my office click shut. I felt no panic as they invaded my most secure room. I felt the cold, methodical precision of a man executing a flawless tactical maneuver. I had handed them the exact rope they required to hang themselves. I quietly ascended the main staircase and retreated directly to my master bedroom. I locked the heavy solid wood door behind me and walked over to my bedside table. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a highly encrypted tablet I had purchased secretly weeks ago. This entire violent confrontation was not a surprise to me. Early last month, my private wealth manager alerted me to multiple unauthorized inquiries appearing on my personal credit report. Someone had been aggressively attempting to verify the total liquidity of my hidden commercial real estate assets. I recognized the desperate methodology immediately. I had spent 50 decades fiercely protecting my regional freight and logistics empire from external corporate threats. I knew exactly how to fortify my own borders against internal enemies. I had quietly brought in a specialized, discreet security firm. I spent a full $5,000 outfitting every single room in this sprawling house with hidden, high-definition audio and video recorders. The tiny lenses were expertly embedded in smoke detectors, antique bookshelves, and ornate picture frames. My home was no longer just a comfortable residence. It was a fully operational, heavily monitored surveillance grid. I booted up the device. The crisp, high-definition video loaded instantly on my tablet screen. I watched Tariq eagerly insert the brass key into the dial of the heavy floor safe. He turned the mechanism, the heavy steel bolts sliding back with a satisfying clank that echoed perfectly through the hidden microphone. Tariq yanked the heavy door open. Monique leaned over his broad shoulder, her eyes wide with raw, predatory anticipation. Tariq bypassed the stacks of old tax returns and reached directly for the thick manila folder resting conspicuously on the top shelf. He pulled out a heavily stamped, official-looking legal document. He unfolded the crisp pages and rapidly scanned the text. A massive, triumphant laugh erupted from his chest. He held the document up for Monique to see clearly. It was a fully executed, properly notarized general power of attorney. The document explicitly granted Tariq absolute authority to manage my real estate, liquidate my bank accounts, and make binding medical decisions on my behalf. Monique excitedly clapped her hands together, celebrating the exact instrument they needed to bypass the tedious legal process of having me declared legally incompetent by a judge. They genuinely believed they had just discovered the ultimate perfectly legal shortcut to my vast wealth. They openly rejoiced in my apparent foolishness for keeping such a dangerous document readily available in a simple safe. What Tariq did not know, and what the hidden camera captured in perfect, undeniable clarity, was that the document he held was a meticulously planted decoy. Every single signature on that paper was technically flawed, intentionally drafted by my lawyer to trigger a massive federal fraud alert the exact moment it was presented to any financial institution. I watched them celebrate their perceived victory, fully knowing they were eagerly holding the exact evidence that would guarantee their absolute destruction. Morning breaks with the loud slam of the heavy oak front door. I stand near the kitchen island holding a ceramic cup of black coffee. I watch through the front bay window as Tariq practically sprints down the paved driveway. He clutches a brown leather briefcase tightly against his chest. Inside that briefcase sits the forged power of attorney he stole from my floor safe last night. He jumps into his leased sport utility vehicle and speeds off toward the financial district. He is absolutely desperate to validate his stolen authority before I can stop him. I turn away from the glass window and walk back into the main hallway. Monique is already awake and aggressively pacing inside my primary bedroom on the ground floor. She holds a yellow metal tape measure. She snaps the rigid metal tape loudly against my antique mahogany bed frame. She does not greet me or ask how my fractured jaw is feeling this morning. She simply barks her first strict order of the day. She informs me that her custom king mattress will be delivered tomorrow afternoon. She dictates that I have exactly until noon today to clear every single piece of my clothing and personal items out of the master suite. She points her manicured finger toward the narrow hallway leading to the basement stairs. She tells me the downstairs storage room is now my permanent residence. She speaks to me with the cold, unyielding authority of a prison warden addressing a disobedient inmate. I do not raise my voice in anger. I do not tell her that she has absolutely no legal right to alter my living arrangements in my own home. I simply nod my head once. I turn around and walk directly to my closet to begin the physical process of surrendering my own bedroom. I pull a single canvas duffel bag from the top shelf of my spacious walk-in closet. I do not pack my expensive tailored suits or my collection of vintage luxury watches. I pack only heavy work jeans, soft flannel shirts, and my essential daily toiletries. I zip the heavy bag shut and carry it out into the carpeted hallway. Monique is busy emptying the contents of my wooden nightstands directly into heavy black trash bags. She shows absolutely no regard for the fragile items or important personal documents inside. I walk silently past her and head down the creaking wooden stairs into the dim basement. I drop my duffel bag onto the cold concrete floor. Before I can turn on the overhead fluorescent lights, a loud crash echoes from the top of the stairs. I walk back up the steps and look into the main living room. Monique is dragging a heavy cardboard storage box across the polished hardwood floors. She lifts the heavy box and dumps the contents entirely into a massive plastic garbage bin. Dozens of vintage vinyl records spill out their fragile cardboard sleeves, tearing against the harsh plastic edges. Those specific records belong to my late wife, Loretta. They were her absolute most prized possessions. They contained the soulful jazz and blues we danced to in our tiny first apartment, long before the corporate money ever existed. Monique grabs a rare original pressing of a classic jazz album and snaps the thick vinyl in half to make it fit perfectly inside the trash bag. The sharp, violent crack of the record echoes through the silent house. My hands immediately curl into tight fists at my sides. The primal urge to storm the room and physically remove her from my property burns intensely in my chest. I stand still and watch her completely destroy the physical remnants of her mother's joy. She does not pause to read the loving handwritten notes Loretta had scribbled on the back of those album covers. She treats them entirely as worthless garbage cluttering up her new luxury aesthetic vision for the house. I force my hands to relax and open. I force my rapid breathing to slow down to a steady rhythm. I step backward into the dark shadows of the basement stairwell. I will not stop her destruction today. I need her to commit fully to this arrogant desecration. I need her absolute lack of empathy recorded perfectly on the hidden security cameras installed directly above the trash bin. Her cruelty is providing the exact digital evidence needed to seal her permanent legal fate. Loretta saw this exact horrific moment coming 5 long years ago. I sat beside her hospital bed during her final days on Earth, holding her frail hand in mine. She pulled me close to her face and whispered a harsh, agonizing truth about our only child. She told me that our daughter did not love us. Loretta explained clearly that Monique only loved the extravagant lifestyle we could buy for her. My wife had quietly watched Monique treat our parental affection as a purely transactional commodity for decades. Loretta used her dying breaths to make me swear one specific binding promise. She ordered me to lock the primary corporate assets away in an impenetrable blind trust immediately after her funeral. She explicitly warned me that the moment I showed any sign of physical weakness or age, Monique would mercilessly tear my financial empire apart to feed her own insatiable vanity. I desperately did not want to believe my wife at the time. I deeply wanted to believe my daughter simply needed more maturity and guidance. Watching Monique happily snap Loretta's favorite records in half proves my brilliant wife was entirely correct. The sweet daughter we raised is completely gone, entirely replaced by a ruthless, calculating opportunist. I turn my back on the living room and descend fully into the concrete basement, honoring my wife's final strategic directive. I sit down at the small metal desk tucked into the far corner of my basement storage room. The underground space is cold, but the large encrypted corporate servers humming quietly under the desk bring me absolute comfort. My mobile phone suddenly vibrates aggressively against the metal surface. I check the caller identification screen. It is Felix, the general manager of the most exclusive luxury classic car dealership in the state. I answer the call on the first ring. Felix sounds extremely panicked and breathless. He informs me that Tariq is currently standing in his main showroom, holding a heavily stamped power of attorney document. Tariq is aggressively demanding to sell my fully restored mint-condition vintage vehicle. That specific car is a highly coveted collector item, easily worth over $150,000. Felix explains that Tariq is loudly demanding an immediate corporate wire transfer for the vehicle. Felix asks me directly if he should halt the transaction immediately and call the local police to report an attempted theft of a registered vehicle. I do not hesitate for a single second. I instruct Felix to approve the sale immediately without any further delay. I order him to accept the forged power of attorney document without asking any probing questions and to process the funds directly into Tariq's personal checking account. Felix stammers on the phone, entirely confused as to why I am actively facilitating the brazen theft of my absolute most prized vintage automobile. I simply thank Felix for his excellent service and end the call abruptly. I lean back in my metal chair in the dark basement. Tariq genuinely believes he has just outsmarted an old man and secured a massive cash windfall. He does not realize that selling a high-value registered asset across state lines using a forged legal document instantly elevates his petty crime from a simple misdemeanor to a major federal felony. I am willingly letting him steal the expensive car because catching a massive predator requires an incredibly heavy piece of bait. Tariq kicked the front door open, his heavy footsteps echoing through the hallway directly above my head. I remained seated in the basement, monitoring the live audio feeds from the hidden cameras. He practically danced into the living room, loudly shouting for Monique to come downstairs. She rushed out of the kitchen, demanding to know why he was making so much noise. Tariq did not answer her with words. He dramatically slapped a crisp, certified piece of paper onto the marble kitchen island. It was a cashier's check for $60,000. The high-definition camera captured the exact moment Monique's eyes widened in sheer, unrestrained disbelief. Tariq boasted about his supreme negotiating skills, completely oblivious to the fact that I had personally authorized the luxury dealership to release the funds. He claimed he had thoroughly intimidated the general manager into fast-tracking the sale of my vintage Mustang. Monique wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply, celebrating their newly acquired liquid wealth as if they had earned a single honest cent of it. They poured my expensive champagne and toasted to their brilliant takeover of my life. They fully believed they had successfully liquidated my most prized physical asset, using a piece of paper they forced a corrupt notary to stamp. They drank my alcohol and laughed about how incredibly easy it was to outsmart a stubborn, irrelevant old man. Tariq bragged that this was only the very beginning of their massive financial harvest. He promised Monique that the house would be entirely transformed by the end of the week, funded completely by the sale of my beloved car. Their staggering arrogance blinded them to the brutal reality of their situation. They were actively celebrating a major federal felony. Every single word they spoke was permanently archived on my encrypted servers. Tariq wasted absolutely no time putting his stolen capital to work. The very next morning, the aggressive, throaty rumble of heavy diesel engines violently shook the foundation of my house. I looked at the external security feeds on my tablet. 3 massive commercial contractor vans were parked diagonally across my driveway, completely crushing my manicured front lawn. Tariq marched out the front door and enthusiastically greeted a crew of heavily tattooed men carrying sledgehammers, crowbars, and thick rolls of industrial plastic sheeting. He had hired an expedited, high-priced demolition crew. He proudly handed the foreman a thick envelope of cash, a direct, untraceable withdrawal from the $60,000 he had stolen just yesterday. Tariq pointed directly toward the large bay windows of my primary bedroom on the ground floor. He ordered the foreman to completely gut the space down to the bare wooden studs. He loudly declared his immediate intention to combine my bedroom and the adjacent sunroom into a sprawling modern master suite for him and Monique. He explicitly instructed the crew to destroy the custom mahogany wainscoting I had installed with my own hands 3 decades ago. The foreman nodded, pocketed the stolen cash, and signaled his men to proceed. I watched through the internal cameras as 4 men in heavy steel-toed boots stomped into my bedroom. They ripped the vintage silk drapes violently from the walls. They swung their heavy steel sledgehammers directly into the drywall, shattering the plaster and sending thick clouds of white dust billowing into the main hallway. The deafening sound of rapid destruction reverberated through the floorboards directly above my head. Monique stood safely in the kitchen, casually sipping a green smoothie, completely unbothered by the violent dismantling of my personal sanctuary. Tariq stood in the hallway, directing the workers with absolute authority, aggressively ordering them to tear out the antique oak flooring. They were literally tearing my home apart piece by piece, funded entirely by my own stolen money. They genuinely believed this rapid, aggressive demolition firmly established their absolute dominance over my property. They thought destroying my physical space would completely break my psychological resolve. They fundamentally failed to realize that I did not care about drywall paint or wood. I cared exclusively about establishing an irrefutable, fully documented chain of criminal evidence. I sat quietly in the cold basement, surrounded by the rhythmic, steady hum of heavy-duty ventilation fans. This space was not a dusty storage unit for forgotten items, as my daughter arrogantly assumed. It was the heavily fortified nerve center of my entire wealth. The walls were lined with climate-controlled, encrypted servers storing decades of meticulous financial data. When I built my logistics empire from a single diesel truck, I learned early on that visible, ostentatious wealth attracts dangerous parasites. I funneled my massive corporate profits directly into an anonymous real estate holding corporation. I aggressively purchased vast commercial properties, busy shopping centers, and high-rise apartment buildings through a complex web of impenetrable blind trusts. My name appeared absolutely nowhere on public property records. I operated entirely in the shadows, building a multi-million-dollar generational fortune, while aggressively projecting the image of a simple, retired blue-collar worker living on a fixed pension. This basement contained the physical ledgers, the corporate seals, and the ultimate access codes to my empire. Monique and Tariq were upstairs celebrating the theft of $60,000, utterly unaware they were standing directly above a highly secure command center, controlling assets worth over $80 million. The thunderous crashing of the demolition crew upstairs suddenly paused. The heavy basement door at the top of the stairs violently swung open. Monique's aggressive footsteps stomped heavily down the wooden steps. She marched into the dim light of the basement, clutching a torn white envelope tightly in her fist. Earlier that morning, the postal carrier had dropped off a certified letter. Monique had intercepted it from the mailbox, assuming it was a routine property tax bill she could use to further document my supposed financial incompetence to her lawyers. Instead, she had illegally opened a highly confidential notice addressed directly to my anonymous holding company regarding a municipal zoning change for a massive commercial plaza. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a dangerous, unstable mixture of deep confusion and intense greed. She slammed the document down on my metal desk. She demanded to know why a corporate entity holding commercial real estate worth $12 million was registered to this specific home address. She pointed her manicured finger at the corporate identification number printed clearly at the top of the page. She realized in an instant that the scale of the money I possessed was vastly greater than a simple pension and a vintage car. She demanded immediate, unfettered access to the banking portals connected to this corporate company. She threatened to call Tariq down to the basement to handle me physically if I did not instantly surrender the corporate account passwords. She believed she had just stumbled upon the ultimate jackpot. She had absolutely no idea she had just triggered the deadliest mechanism of my trap. Monique shoves the crumpled white envelope inches from my nose. She screams that the $12 million valuation printed on the municipal zoning notice is undeniable proof of my lifelong betrayal. She aggressively slaps the thick parchment against my metal desk. She accuses me of intentionally hiding an absolute fortune in the shadows while deliberately forcing her to struggle through life. Her voice echoes sharply off the concrete walls of the basement, laced with a venomous entitlement. She demands to know why she spent years drowning in credit card debt, while her own father hoarded commercial real estate empires under fake corporate names. I sit completely still in my metal chair and let her exhaust her vocal cords. I do not apologize for securing my own wealth. I do not remind her that I paid off her debts entirely on 3 separate occasions before cutting off her limitless allowance. She views my financial independence as a direct, calculated attack on her personal happiness. Monique leans over the desk, invading my personal space just as her husband had done earlier. She loudly threatens to use Tariq's newly acquired power of attorney to systematically seize every single commercial account associated with the holding company. She promises to drain the corporate trust completely dry by the end of the business week. She believes the forged document Tariq locked in his briefcase gives her absolute supreme authority over my entire financial existence. Her eyes are wide with the intoxicating thrill of sudden, unimaginable wealth. She expects me to panic and beg her to reconsider. She expects me to negotiate. She completely misreads the absolute calm radiating from my posture. I look directly into her eyes and inform her that a standard residential power of attorney carries absolutely zero weight against a heavily fortified commercial holding corporation. Monique's face contorts into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She realizes instantly that her husband's stolen document cannot unlock the specific corporate vault she now craves. She frantically searches the basement room for leverage. She spots a heavy steel box cutter resting on top of a stack of cardboard moving boxes near the stairs. She grabs the utility knife, aggressively extending the razor-sharp blade with a loud click. She steps up to my chair and presses the cold steel edge directly against the side of my neck, right next to my freshly stitched jaw. She orders me to open the corporate banking portal immediately. She demands an instant digital transfer to prove my compliance. I remain perfectly seated, keeping my breathing deliberately slow and measured. I do not flinch from the sharp metal pressing into my skin. I calmly inform Monique that the corporate holding accounts require extreme dual authentication to authorize any major wire transfers. I explain that physical bank tokens and biometric verifications are mandatory for accessing the primary funds. She presses the blade harder, demanding whatever liquid capital I can currently access without raising an alarm. I slowly reach for my encrypted tablet. I deliberately pull up a secondary, highly specific corporate operating account. I log into the secure banking portal while my daughter holds a weapon to my throat. I navigate directly to the outbound wire transfer page. I ask Monique for Tariq's exact personal routing information. She eagerly reads the numbers off her phone, her greed completely overriding any rational thought about the massive felony she is actively committing. My fingers move steadily across the glowing digital keyboard. I authorize a direct wire transfer of exactly $50,000 from my corporate operating fund straight into Tariq's personal checking account. I hit the final confirmation button and turn the screen toward her. I show her the glowing green notification, verifying that the funds have been successfully routed. She snatches her box cutter away from my neck, letting out a loud, breathless gasp of victory. She stares at the tablet screen as if she has just conquered the world. She believes her violent intimidation tactic has completely broken my defenses. She turns and practically runs up the basement stairs to find Tariq and share the magnificent news. She leaves me sitting alone in the silence, entirely unaware of the lethal financial snare that has just tightly closed around their necks. I do not wipe the small drop of blood where the box cutter nicked my skin. I simply close the tablet and lock the screen. I had intentionally left that specific municipal zoning notice sitting clearly visible inside the hallway mailbox. I knew Monique's lifelong habit of aggressively snooping through my personal correspondence. I knew her overwhelming greed would absolutely compel her to rip open an envelope bearing a corporate seal. I specifically needed her to discover the exact scale of my wealth today. The secondary corporate operating account we just accessed is not a standard bank fund. It is a highly specialized escrow account meticulously structured to manage interstate commercial logistics. Because of the massive volume of daily transactions, that specific account is heavily and continuously monitored by elite federal tax authorities. Any irregular, unverified wire transfer exceeding $10,000 instantly triggers an automatic, unblockable alert within the federal banking system. I specifically orchestrated this violent robbery to guarantee they stole from the single most heavily fortified government-monitored account in my entire portfolio. They are no longer just stealing from an old man. They are actively committing major wire fraud against a federally tracked commercial entity. Through the hidden audio feed, I hear Tariq screaming in absolute delight on the ground floor. His banking application has just violently chimed, notifying him of the massive $50,000 deposit hitting his account. His triumphant shouts rattle the floorboards. He loudly proclaims to Monique that they are finally playing in the major leagues. The sudden influx of stolen cash completely destroys his last remaining shred of common sense. He immediately pulls out his phone and begins making calls. He books an extravagant, wildly expensive catered dinner party to be hosted right here in my house for the following night. He aggressively invites all of his wealthy, pretentious business associates. He desperately wants to flaunt his newly acquired wealth and establish his absolute dominance over my estate in front of an elite audience. He orders premium champagne, private chefs, and valet parking, spending thousands of the stolen dollars in mere minutes. I listen to his pathetic, arrogant boasting and slowly reach for my mobile phone. I open a secure messaging application and compose a highly specific text to my attorney, Mr. Holloway. I authorize him to contact the commercial bank and officially flag the $50,000 wire transfer as a hostile, unauthorized transaction committed under extreme physical duress. I order him to formally initiate the federal fraud protocol without delay. The bank will immediately lock the funds and notify the authorities but Tariq will not discover this freeze until the following evening. Tariq expects to host the most glorious, triumphant dinner party of his entire life tomorrow night. He is eagerly inviting the city's elite to witness his newfound power. I sit in the dark, patiently preparing my tuxedo. I intend to give his distinguished guests a truly unforgettable performance. The evening sun dips below the horizon, replaced by the brilliant glare of headlights sweeping across my property. I watch through the narrow basement window as a stream of sleek, high-end luxury sedans and imported sports cars pull into my long driveway. Tariq actually hired a professional valet service to manage the vehicles of his pretentious guests. Young men in sharp red vests sprint back and forth, parking the expensive cars right on top of the crushed grass where the demolition crew had parked their heavy vans just yesterday. The sheer audacity of his performance is almost impressive. Heavy footsteps thunder down the wooden stairs leading to my basement sanctuary. Monique stops on the bottom landing dressed in an extravagant sequined evening gown paid for by my stolen funds. She glares at me with absolute disgust. She explicitly orders me to remain completely silent and out of sight for the rest of the night. She tells me to lock the basement door from the inside because my presence would severely embarrass her in front of Tariq's elite business associates. She claims my faded flannel shirts and quiet demeanor do not fit the high society image they are carefully projecting to their wealthy investors. She turns around, marches back up the stairs, and slams the heavy door shut. The deadbolt clicks loudly into place. She genuinely believes she has trapped me in the dark. She thinks I am just a pathetic, beaten old man cowering in the shadows of my own home while she hosts a glamorous banquet directly above my head. I do not bang on the door or shout my protests. I listen to the faint sound of a string quartet echoing through the floorboards. I calmly stand up from my metal desk and walk toward the antique cedar wardrobe pushed against the far wall of the storage room. The muted vibrations of clinking crystal glasses and loud, arrogant laughter filter down through the ceiling above me. I tap a sequence of commands into my encrypted tablet, bringing up the live audio and video feed from the dining room camera hidden seamlessly inside the ornate crystal chandelier. The scene unfolding on the glowing screen is a masterclass in absolute delusion. Tariq stands proudly at the head of my long mahogany dining table holding a glass of vintage champagne. 10 extremely wealthy, sharply dressed investors sit around the table hanging on his every fabricated word. Tariq speaks with the smooth, practiced cadence of a seasoned con artist. He boasts loudly about his allegedly vast commercial real estate portfolio. He claims to personally own shopping centers and high-rise apartment buildings across the state. He is actively stealing the exact details of my anonymous holding corporation and presenting my life's work as his own brilliant empire. The sheer scale of his lies is breathtaking. He points toward the driveway and brags about the $60,000 in liquid capital he just secured from selling a vintage Mustang. He pitches this imaginary wealth as undeniable proof of his incredible financial acumen. He leans forward, placing his hands flat on the table, and makes his ultimate pitch. He aggressively pressures the 10 investors to hand over $3 million in seed capital for a massive new commercial development project. He promises them guaranteed astronomical returns within a single fiscal year. He assures them that his massive portfolio makes their investment entirely risk-free. Several of the men nod in agreement, pulling expensive gold pens from their tailored jackets. They are completely captivated by the illusion Tariq has built using my stolen money and my hijacked corporate identity. Tariq smiles a predatory, victorious smile. He thinks he is mere minutes away from securing a massive fortune that will permanently cement his status among the financial elite. He is practically salivating as the investors open their leather portfolios to review his fraudulent contracts. He gestures expansively around the room, claiming the recent demolition in the master suite is just a small part of a complete multi-million-dollar renovation. He paints a vivid picture of limitless cash flow and unstoppable growth. The investors exchange eager glances, completely convinced by his performance. The trap is perfectly set, filled to the brim with Tariq's monumental ego and the eager greed of his unverified guests. I watch his flawless performance on the tablet and feel a cold wave of familiar disappointment. I have watched Tariq play this exact same charade 3 times before. During the first 5 years of their marriage, I personally financed his first 3 ambitious business ventures. I handed him hundreds of thousands of dollars in legitimate seed capital, hoping he would finally build a stable future for my daughter. He squandered absolutely every single penny. He never invested the money into logistics inventory or viable commercial infrastructure. Instead, he completely drained the business accounts to purchase custom Italian-tailored suits, lease exotic luxury cars, and book extravagant month-long vacations to Dubai. He operated under the pathetic delusion that looking like a wealthy man was exactly the same thing as actually being one. When the businesses inevitably crashed into total bankruptcy, he blamed the market, the economy, and everyone but his own staggering incompetence. I quietly absorbed those massive losses and permanently closed my checkbook. I refused to fund his delusions ever again. That is the exact reason he hates me. I represent the unyielding reality he desperately wants to avoid. I open the heavy cedar wardrobe in the corner of the basement. I pull out a pristine, custom-tailored black tuxedo. I slide my arms into the crisp white shirt, fasten the onyx cufflinks, and adjust the black silk bow tie. I inspect my reflection in the small mirror mounted on the wardrobe door. The white medical bandages on my jaw stand out sharply against my dark skin and the immaculate formal wear. I look exactly like a man who has survived a brutal war and emerged completely victorious. I ignore the main basement door Monique locked from the outside. Instead, I walk to the back of the storage room and unlock the narrow hidden servant's staircase. This passage leads directly from the basement to a concealed door hidden within the dining room's wooden paneling. I climb the steep, narrow steps with absolute silent precision. The muffled voices of the investors discussing their $3 million commitment grow louder with every upward step. I reach the top landing and press the hidden latch. The wood paneling swings open smoothly. I step out of the shadows and walk directly into the brilliantly glowing dining room. The sudden appearance of a bleeding, formally dressed older man stepping out of the literal walls instantly murders the conversation. The string quartet abruptly stops playing. The 10 wealthy investors freeze in their chairs. Tariq drops his champagne glass, shattering it completely against the hardwood floor. Monique gasps, her face draining of all color. I do not look at my daughter or her terrified husband. I walk calmly to the center of the room and look directly at the most prominent investor at the table. I introduce myself clearly and deliberately. I do not introduce myself as Tariq's elderly, incompetent father-in-law. I introduce myself as Dwayne, the primary stakeholder and silent owner of the specific commercial bank that currently holds every single ounce of Tariq's massive, crippling debt. The dining room fell into an absolute suffocating silence. The transition from boisterous laughter to complete stillness was instantaneous and heavy. Tariq stood frozen at the head of my table, his mouth slightly open in sheer disbelief. His fingers went entirely limp. The delicate crystal champagne flute slipped from his grasp and shattered into dozens of glittering pieces against the hardwood floor. The sharp crash echoed like a gunshot, but not a single investor flinched or looked away from me. They stared intently at the fresh medical bandages covering my jaw and the immaculate tailoring of my black tuxedo. Monique reacted with the desperate, erratic energy of a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. She aggressively pushed her chair back, the wooden legs loudly scraping against the floorboards. She rushed toward me, forcing a painfully fake, condescending smile for her wealthy audience. She loudly declared that I was simply having another one of my bad episodes. She reached out to grab my arm, apologizing profusely to the guests for the interruption. She claimed I suffered from advanced dementia and frequently wandered out of my designated care room with elaborate paranoid delusions. She tried to physically steer me back toward the hidden servants' staircase, whispering vicious threats under her breath. She told the investors to completely ignore the ramblings of a confused, deeply sick old man. Her performance was a desperate attempt to maintain the fragile illusion of control. She genuinely believed she could dismiss my presence and continue the charade seamlessly. I stood my ground like a concrete pillar. I easily brushed her trembling hand off my sleeve without breaking eye contact with the men seated at my table. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of confusion. I projected absolute terrifying authority. I completely ignored my daughter's frantic attempts to silence me. I reached inside the breast pocket of my tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick stack of tightly bound financial dossiers. I stepped confidently up to the long table and began distributing the perfectly organized files to each of the 10 investors. I slid the heavy cream-colored envelopes directly in front of their leather portfolios with precise, deliberate movements. Monique shrieked loudly, demanding they refuse to look at the garbage I was handing them. Tariq finally snapped out of his paralyzed state and lunged forward desperately, trying to snatch the files away from his guests. He was far too late. The men had already broken the seals and opened the folders. I instructed them to read the highlighted figures on the very first page. The documents contained absolute, undeniable proof of Tariq's impending catastrophic corporate bankruptcy. I provided them with exact copies of his outstanding loan defaults, all clearly bearing the official seal of the commercial bank I actively controlled. I then directed their undivided attention to the second page of the dossier. I laid out the meticulously documented evidence of the stolen vintage Mustang transaction from earlier that morning. I showed them the forged signature and the corresponding illegal dealership wire transfer receipts. Finally, I told them to look at the third page. I revealed the massive $50,000 federal wire fraud Tariq had happily triggered that very morning. I provided the exact tracking numbers of the frozen escrow account and the federal investigation alert initiated by my attorney. I methodically explained the severe legal implications of accepting seed capital from a man currently under active investigation for major interstate fraud. I detailed exactly how their own clean funds would immediately become entangled in federal asset forfeiture if they signed a single contract with Tariq tonight. Tariq's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray under the glow of the crystal chandelier. He stammered incoherently, completely unable to form a rational defense against the mountain of irrefutable paper evidence resting right in front of his targeted victims. His entire meticulously crafted empire of lies was crumbling into ash in real time. The investors scrutinized the documents, their initial curiosity rapidly transforming into profound professional horror. They realized they were sitting directly in the blast radius of a massive financial detonation. I built my massive logistics empire from the ground up by recognizing toxic liabilities instantly. On the sprawling freight docks, a single bad contract or an unreliable shipping partner could bankrupt an entire fleet in a matter of months. I learned early on to ruthlessly eliminate financial disease before it could spread through my ranks. I spoke to these 10 investors entirely in their own elite corporate language. I used precise terminology regarding asset forfeiture, fiduciary risk, and criminal financial liability. I systematically dismantled Monique's pathetic dementia narrative with every highly technical sentence I delivered. The men at the table recognized immediately that I was not a confused, rambling senior citizen wandering out of a basement. They saw me clearly as an apex predator in the corporate ecosystem. They respected the cold, clinical precision of my sudden attack. I proved my absolute cognitive sharpness by laying out the exact legal statutes Tariq had violated. I demonstrated beyond any doubt that my mind was far sharper and significantly more dangerous than the desperate, sweating man who had invited them into my home. The lead investor, a stern man with silver hair and a sharp, tailored suit, closed the dossier and pushed it away as if the paper itself were coated in poison. He did not say a single word to Tariq. He simply stood up, buttoned his jacket, and picked up his briefcase. The other 9 men followed his lead in absolute synchronized unison. They immediately recognized the extreme toxic liability sitting at the head of the table. They gathered their belongings and walked briskly toward the front foyer without a single backward glance. Tariq chased frantically after them, begging and pleading for them to stop, desperately promising that the documents were all fabricated lies. The heavy front door slammed shut brutally, cutting off his pathetic whines. The valets would bring their luxury cars around, and Tariq's professional reputation in this city would be permanently incinerated before their engines even started. The entire total destruction took exactly 3 minutes. He stood alone in the empty foyer, completely humiliated and totally financially ruined. The crushing reality of his absolute destruction washed over him. He had lost his wealthy investors, his stolen capital, and his imaginary empire in one swift stroke. Tariq turned slowly and looked back at me, standing calmly in the center of the shattered dining room. His eyes were entirely black, with pure, unhinged malice. The veneer of the smooth, sophisticated businessman completely vanished, leaving only a violent, cornered animal. He let out a primal, guttural roar that shook the glass panes in the windows. He lowered his broad shoulders and charged at me with his full body weight. He sprinted across the room and violently tackled me directly into the edge of the heavy mahogany dining table. Tariq hits me with the overwhelming force of a runaway freight train. We crash violently directly into the sharp edge of the mahogany dining table. The heavy antique wood groans loudly under the brutal impact of our combined weight. The massive crystal centerpiece shatters instantly upon impact. It rains hundreds of jagged, glittering shards of glass across the polished surface and onto the expensive Persian rug below. I fall backward onto the ruined table, my spine slamming hard against the unyielding wood. Tariq scrambles frantically on top of me. He pins my shoulders down with his heavy, muscular knees. His large hands grip my lapels aggressively, twisting the crisp, clean fabric of my custom tuxedo shirt. His face hovers mere inches from mine, completely contorted into a terrifying mask of pure, untethered rage. Spittle flies from his lips as he screams a barrage of incoherent, violent threats. He raises his heavy right fist high into the air. He fully intends to drive his bare knuckles straight through my freshly stitched jaw. He desperately wants to obliterate the man who just publicly incinerated his entire financial existence and humiliated him in front of the city's elite. I look directly up at his descending fist. I do not flinch. I do not raise my hands to block the incoming devastating blow. I do not struggle against his crushing weight. I keep my breathing perfectly steady and my eyes entirely cold. I calmly raise my left index finger. I do not point it at his angry face. I point it directly over his shoulder, aiming precisely at the ornate crown molding in the far corner of the high dining room ceiling. The complete chilling absence of fear in my eyes instantly breaks his violent momentum. Tariq's raised fist halts abruptly in midair. He slowly follows the exact trajectory of my pointed finger. He spots the tiny blinking red light embedded flawlessly inside the intricate plaster design. I stare directly into his panicked, wide eyes. I inform Tariq that the tiny red light belongs to a high-definition, wide-angle, commercial-grade security camera. I speak with absolute, chilling clarity, ensuring the highly sensitive, hidden microphone picks up every single syllable. I tell him that this specific camera is not recording to a vulnerable local hard drive stored anywhere in this house. I explain that the audio and visual feed of him currently pinning a 70-year-old man to a shattered table is actively broadcasting live right now. I tell him the crystal-clear footage is streaming directly to a heavily encrypted off-site server actively monitored by my corporate attorney, Mr. Holloway. I state exactly what this means in brutal, unforgiving legal terms. I tell Tariq he has just committed a violent, premeditated felony assault on an elderly citizen. I assure him this crime is completely captured on a secure digital feed that cannot be deleted, altered, or contested. Tariq freezes completely. The sheer crushing gravity of his legal peril crashes down on his shoulders. The intoxicating, blinding rage evaporates instantly, replaced entirely by a paralyzing, icy terror. He realizes he has foolishly crossed the definitive line from corporate fraud straight into severe violent criminal liability. He knows perfectly well that Mr. Holloway will not hesitate for a single second to hand this exact footage directly to the district attorney. Tariq slowly lowers his fist, his large hands shaking violently. He scrambles clumsily off my chest, backing away from the ruined table, as if the wood itself is on fire. He stares at the ceiling camera, utterly defeated, completely humiliated, and actively hyperventilating. Monique watches this entire pathetic exchange from the foyer archway. She recognizes the absolute, unmitigated disaster unfolding right in front of her eyes. She rushes forward and grabs Tariq tightly by the arm, violently dragging him away from the dining table and out of my personal space. She physically positions herself directly between her trembling husband and the camera lens. She knows her strategy of physical intimidation has completely, spectacularly failed. She instantly shifts gears, pivoting flawlessly to the next phase of her malicious, calculating strategy. Monique pulls her mobile phone from her sequined evening purse. Her fingers move frantically, aggressively across the glowing screen. She dials a specific number she has clearly kept on standby for exactly this type of catastrophic world-ending emergency. I carefully sit up on the edge of the ruined mahogany table. I methodically brush a sharp piece of shattered crystal from my tuxedo jacket, ensuring my posture radiates absolute composure. I watch Monique pacing the hardwood floor, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. She has always instinctively resorted to the absolute dirtiest, most devious tactics available the moment she feels legitimately cornered. When she was a junior in high school, she faced a definitive failing grade in an advanced mathematics course. Instead of actually studying or accepting the academic failure like a responsible adult, she maliciously and falsely accused her elderly teacher of inappropriate physical assault. She completely fabricated an elaborate, horrifying, career-destroying lie solely to force the school administration to remove the failing grade from her official transcript. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on elite legal fees to quietly clean up that specific disaster and protect her future from the consequences of her own evil. I know her dark sociopathic playbook intimately. I know she possesses absolutely zero moral boundaries when her comfortable, lavish lifestyle is actively threatened. She will eagerly destroy anyone, invent any lie, and completely ruin any reputation to maintain her iron grip on power and wealth. She is currently preparing to launch her ultimate, most devastating psychological strike against me. Monique speaks rapidly into the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured panic and flawless theatrical tears. She loudly declares to the person on the other end of the line that she urgently requires an emergency after-hours psychiatric evaluation immediately at my home address. She states explicitly and loudly that her elderly father has just suffered a complete and highly violent psychotic break. She claims to the dispatcher that I am actively hallucinating, physically destroying expensive property, and posing a severe immediate physical threat to myself and my terrified, defenseless family. She fully plans to buy a forced, legally binding dementia diagnosis tonight. She desperately wants a corrupt medical professional to officially declare me entirely mentally incompetent and dangerous. She knows a certified medical hold will completely invalidate my corporate testimony. She believes a medical straitjacket will allow her aggressive defense lawyers to easily dismiss the damning video evidence of Tariq's assault as the paranoid, digitally altered delusions of a severely sick, failing mind. She walks a few steps into the kitchen, intentionally creating physical distance from the dining room camera. But my hidden high-gain microphones catch her exact transactional terms with pristine clarity. She bypasses the standard dispatcher and speaks directly to the specific doctor on call. She aggressively promises to wire a $20,000 cash bribe directly to his private offshore account the absolute second he signs the involuntary commitment papers. She sternly demands he arrive at my property with heavy chemical sedatives and the legal forms fully prepared for immediate execution. She abruptly ends the call and steps confidently back into the dining room. She shoots me a look of absolute lethal triumph. She genuinely believes she has successfully weaponized the medical system to officially erase my mind, dismiss the felonies, and completely seize my entire multi-million-dollar estate. She fully expects me to panic at the impending terrifying arrival of men in white coats carrying restraints. She does not know that my private investigators have already spent the last week heavily investigating the exact corrupt doctor she just bribed. The grandfather clock in the hallway strikes midnight, just as the heavy brass knocker sounds against the front door. Monique practically sprints to answer it. She ushers in a tall, sharply dressed man carrying a pristine leather medical bag. This is Dr. Vance. He steps into my ruined dining room, stepping over the shattered crystal of my centerpiece with polished Italian loafers. He does not look at the blood on my collar or the bruises forming on Tariq's knuckles. He only sees the lucrative transaction he came here to complete. He pulls a clipboard from his bag, displaying a pre-filled medical evaluation form. The boxes declaring severe cognitive decline and violent dementia are already neatly checked off. He only needs to date and sign the bottom line to legally erase my autonomy. Vance approaches me with a sickeningly sweet, entirely manufactured smile. He speaks to me in a high-pitched, slow cadence, the exact tone a patronizing adult uses to scold a confused toddler. He tells me that it is time to stop fighting and let my loving family take over my burdensome affairs. He assures me the facility he has chosen is very comfortable and that they will take excellent care of my failing mind. He pulls a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket, dramatically unscrewing the cap. He asks Monique to point out the best lighting so he can finalize the involuntary commitment papers. He is entirely blind to the absolute stillness of the room. He assumes I am broken, terrified by the looming threat of a medical straitjacket. I slowly rise from the edge of the shattered dining table and walk over to my favorite leather armchair in the adjacent study. I sit down and gesture for the arrogant physician to take the seat across from me. Dr. Vance chuckles softly, humoring what he perceives as the final pathetic act of defiance from a senile old man. He sits on the edge of the velvet sofa, poising his gold pen over the fraudulent medical document. Before the nib can touch the paper, I reach into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I withdraw a plain, unmarked black folder. I toss it casually onto the glass coffee table separating us. The heavy cardboard slides smoothly across the surface, stopping inches from Dr. Vance's perfectly manicured hands. I instruct him to review my personal medical history before he signs away his entire professional career. Vance rolls his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh of exaggerated patience. He flips open the black cover. His patronizing smile vanishes instantly. The color drains completely from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly embalmed corpse. The very first document in the stack is a highly detailed, officially stamped transcript of his private offshore bank accounts located in the Cayman Islands. I point out the exact $20,000 pending wire transfer Monique initiated just 40 minutes ago. I then instruct him to turn the page. His trembling fingers reveal meticulously compiled undeniable proof of 3 previous illegal psychiatric holds he executed for cash over the past 4 years. The dossiers contain sworn statements from the victim's legitimate primary care physicians, bank routing numbers matching his illicit bribes, and explicit text messages tying him directly to the horrific medical fraud. I speak to him with brutal surgical precision. I inform him that the files in his lap are not copies. They are the exact verified documents currently sitting on the desk of a federal prosecutor who owes me a very large personal favor. I watch the absolute terror seize his nervous system. His breathing becomes shallow and erratic. A thick bead of sweat rolls down his temple, staining the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He drops his gold pen onto the table, staring at the undeniable evidence of his serial medical malpractice. He completely understands that the secure, untraceable life he built on the suffering of betrayed elders has just been entirely detonated. The arrogant, condescending doctor who walked into my home 5 minutes ago is completely gone. In his place sits a terrified, broken criminal, realizing the trap has snapped shut with lethal force. I did not pull Dr. Vance's name out of thin air tonight. I knew precisely who Monique would call the moment she felt her financial control slipping away. Over the years, I noticed a deeply disturbing pattern in my daughter's behavior. Whenever she required highly questionable prescriptions to fuel her lavish, high-stress lifestyle, she always visited this specific high-priced concierge physician. He was notorious among the city's elite circles for providing absolutely any medical documentation his wealthy clients desired, provided the discreet cash envelope was thick enough. I fully anticipated she would eventually weaponize him against me. Therefore, I authorized my team of elite private investigators to spend the entire last week digging ruthlessly into Dr. Vance's shadowed past. They bypassed his pathetic digital firewalls, traced his meticulously laundered funds across international borders, and located the specific families he had previously destroyed for a quick payout. I gathered every single piece of his dirty laundry and compiled it into a lethal legal weapon. I knew Monique would attempt to purchase my sanity, so I preemptively purchased the executioner she planned to use against me. I leaned forward in my leather armchair and offer the trembling doctor a brutal, non-negotiable choice. I tell him he can either walk out of my house right now and immediately lose his medical license, face a massive federal indictment, and spend the next 15 years rotting in a maximum security prison. Or he can reach into the back of the black folder, pull out the blank legal affidavit my attorneys thoughtfully prepared, and write a sworn, highly detailed confession. I demand he document the exact terms of Monique's bribery attempt tonight. I demand he write down the exact monetary figure she promised him to falsely diagnose a perfectly sane man with violent dementia. Dr. Vance sweats profusely, completely soaking his expensive shirt. He looks at the shattered dining room, at the undeniable proof of his own corruption, and frantically grabs his gold fountain pen. His hand shakes violently as he writes his complete confession. He details every single word Monique spoke to him on the phone. He signs his name at the bottom of the page, binding himself legally to the truth and permanently destroying Monique's entire strategy. I take the freshly signed affidavit, inspect the signature, and hand him back his pre-filled involuntary commitment form. I instruct him to walk out into the hallway and deliver his final diagnosis to the clients who hired him. Tariq and Monique wait eagerly in the foyer, shifting on their feet, completely anticipating a victory. They expect the doctor to hand them the legal keys to my entire kingdom. I stay seated in my armchair, watching the hallway through the open study door. What exactly happens when the corrupt doctor they hired hands them a legally binding document detailing their own massive, unpardonable crimes? Dr. Vance steps out of the study, his face ashen and slick with cold sweat. His expensive leather medical bag hangs limply from his trembling grip, dragging against his leg. Monique and Tariq stand shoulder to shoulder in the foyer, their eyes wide with greedy anticipation. They practically vibrate with excitement, fully expecting Vance to hand over the finalized involuntary commitment papers that will permanently lock me away in a heavily guarded facility. Monique holds her hand out, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her face. She smoothly thanks him in advance for his absolute discretion and prompt professional service. Dr. Vance does not look at her. He does not speak a single word of confirmation or reassurance. He simply thrusts the crisp white paper into her outstretched hand, turns on his heel, and practically sprints toward the front door. He throws the heavy oak door open and flees into the dark night, abandoning his lucrative bribery scheme entirely to save himself from federal prison. Monique frowns, deeply confused by his sudden, highly erratic departure. She looks down at the document in her hand. Tariq leans heavily over her shoulder, eager to see the official medical diagnosis that will grant them total, unmitigated control over my vast empire. Monique reads the first line. Her smug, victorious smile vanishes instantly. She reads the second line, detailing the exact $20,000 offshore bribe she offered just an hour ago. The color completely drains from her face. Her hands begin to shake so violently that the paper produces a loud, crisp rattle in the silent hallway. She reads the final paragraph, a sworn legal confession signed by the corrupt doctor admitting to their entire criminal conspiracy. Monique's knees buckle beneath her. She collapses onto the hardwood floor, dropping the paper as if it were coated in lethal acid. She lets out a hollow, breathless gasp of pure horror. The trap has officially closed. Before Tariq can even process the devastating contents of the dropped affidavit, the front doorbell chimes with a sharp, piercing clarity. The sudden sound cuts through the heavy, suffocating tension in the foyer like a physical blade. I walk calmly out of the study, stepping effortlessly over the shattered crystal of my ruined dining room table and open the front door myself. Mr. Holloway, my lead corporate attorney, stands on the porch, bathed in the harsh, uncompromising glare of the exterior security lights. He wears a tailored charcoal suit and an expression of absolute unyielding professional resolve. Flanking him tightly on either side are two massive, heavily armed county sheriffs. Their tactical belts bristle with specialized equipment, and their hands rest comfortably near their holstered service weapons. They step past the threshold, their heavy steel-toed boots thudding loudly against the polished floorboards of my home. Tariq snaps his head toward the door, his eyes wide with a manic, cornered desperation. He realizes instantly that his carefully constructed illusion of absolute power is actively crumbling into dust right before his eyes. He steps aggressively toward the law enforcement officers, his chest puffed out in a pathetic, transparent display of manufactured dominance. He loudly screams that this is his private residence and violently demands they leave the premises immediately. He claims they have absolutely no legal right or jurisdiction to trespass on his secured property. Tariq desperately reaches into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and rips out the folded forged power of attorney document. He aggressively shoves the crumpled paper directly into the broad chest of the lead sheriff. He shouts that he holds supreme overriding legal authority over my entire estate, my corporate finances, and my physical well-being. He explicitly commands the armed officers to arrest me right now for trespassing and erratic, highly dangerous behavior. The sheriff does not flinch or step back. He calmly looks down at the paper pressed against his uniform, then looks up at Tariq with a mixture of professional boredom and profound, unmistakable pity. Tariq's voice cracks as he continues to shout, his entire body shaking with impotent rage. He genuinely believes his fabricated piece of paper acts as an impenetrable magical shield against the brutal reality of the law. He fundamentally fails to understand that paper only holds power when it is backed by actual undeniable leverage. Tariq's delusion of control is particularly pathetic given his actual financial reality. While he spent the last several months plotting to steal my commercial assets, I spent the last few weeks surgically dismantling his entirely fraudulent lifestyle. Exactly 2 days prior to this dinner party, I utilized my holding corporation to quietly purchase the primary debt on Tariq and Monique's luxurious downtown penthouse apartment. They had aggressively projected an image of massive, boundless wealth to their social circle, hosting lavish parties and driving least exotic cars. The brutal truth, hidden carefully behind their designer clothes, was that they had not paid a single cent toward their massive mortgage in over 8 months. They were drowning in toxic debt, actively dodging aggressive collection calls, and facing imminent catastrophic foreclosure. Tariq viewed my corporate accounts as his personal salvation, a massive lifeboat to rescue him from his own staggering financial incompetence. He assumed the bank would negotiate endless extensions. He never suspected that a ruthless, deeply offended father-in-law would silently buy the paper, assume absolute control of the debt, and immediately trigger the harshest possible penalty clauses hidden deep within the fine print of his contract. Mr. Holloway steps forward, gently pushing Tariq's trembling hand aside. He reaches into his leather briefcase and pulls out a thick stack of heavily stamped legal documents. He speaks with the cold, clinical precision of an executioner. He formally informs Tariq and Monique that the power of attorney document is officially declared void, recognized legally as a fraudulent instrument secured through criminal coercion. Mr. Holloway then presents the first official court order. It is an immediate, non-negotiable eviction notice from my property signed by a Superior Court judge just hours ago. He dictates that their continued presence in my home is now classified as criminal trespassing. Monique sobs uncontrollably on the floor, the brutal reality of her total defeat finally shattering her immense ego. Tariq stammers wildly, insisting they will simply return to their downtown penthouse and fight me in court from their own secure fortress. Mr. Holloway produces the second court order. He holds up the official notice of total finalized foreclosure. He informs Tariq that the commercial bank has officially seized the luxury apartment due to extensive unresolved non-payment. He explicitly explains that the locks on the penthouse were changed by federal marshals exactly 2 hours ago. They have absolutely no home to return to, no safe harbor to retreat toward, and zero access to any stolen funds. Their entire fraudulent empire has been completely eradicated in a single evening. The lead sheriff steps forward, resting his heavy hand on his tactical belt. He looks directly at Tariq and issues a final uncompromising ultimatum. He grants them exactly 10 minutes to pack a single suitcase of basic personal belongings and permanently vacate the premises. The sheriff warns that any resistance, hesitation, or aggressive movement will result in their immediate forceful arrest. The trap has snapped shut entirely, leaving them entirely destitute. Will Tariq finally accept his total destruction and leave peacefully, or will his shattered pride force him into one last violent mistake? The 10-minute countdown echoes heavily in the silent foyer. The lead sheriff drops his hand to his holstered weapon, gesturing firmly toward the grand staircase to indicate they should begin packing their belongings. Tariq does not move toward the stairs. His rigid posture completely fractures. The sophisticated facade of the wealthy real estate mogul shatters entirely, leaving behind a terrified, utterly broken man. The absolute reality of possessing $0, zero properties, and zero future violently crashes into his nervous system. His mind simply cannot process the magnitude of his instantaneous poverty. He snaps. Instead of walking up to the bedroom to collect his clothes, Tariq turns and sprints wildly into the adjacent kitchen. The sudden, erratic movement forces the two sheriffs to instantly shift their stances, shouting loud verbal warnings to halt. They maintain a tight defensive formation around Mr. Holloway and me, creating a solid human barrier. We hear the harsh scrape of metal against wood. Tariq charges back into the archway, holding a massive 10-inch steel butcher knife. He ripped the heavy blade directly from the culinary block on the granite island. He moves with chaotic, frantic energy. He lunges toward the front entrance, aggressively slamming the heavy brass deadbolts shut to barricade the primary exit. He plants his large frame directly in the center of the hallway, physically blocking the law enforcement officers from the door. He brandishes the gleaming culinary weapon, wildly slashing the air in front of him. He breathes heavily, his chest heaving with manic exertion. He has officially crossed the threshold from a white-collar fraudster into a highly dangerous, actively armed threat. He believes holding the room hostage will somehow magically reverse the total annihilation of his life. The sheriffs react with immediate lethal precision. They unholster their service weapons in perfect unison, leveling the dark barrels squarely at Tariq's chest. They issue deafening, rapid-fire commands, ordering him to drop the knife and drop to his knees immediately. Their voices boom through the foyer, echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. Tariq completely ignores their direct orders. He operates entirely on the blind adrenaline of a trapped predator. He lunges sideways with terrifying speed, grabbing Monique violently by the thick collar of her sequined evening gown. He yanks her roughly against his chest, wrapping his thick, muscular forearm tight around her throat. He completely cuts off her airway, dragging her backward into the threshold of the kitchen. He presses the razor-sharp edge of the heavy butcher knife directly against the bare skin of her upper arm. Monique lets out a piercing, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. The horrific reality of her situation finally pierces through her overwhelming, lifelong greed. She stares wildly at the man she married. She recognizes in an instant that Tariq is not a loving partner in wealth, but a vicious, soulless parasite perfectly willing to butcher her flesh for basic leverage. She cries hysterically, begging him to put the weapon down and surrender to the police. Tariq screams his demands over her frantic sobbing, his voice echoing with unhinged malice. He looks directly at me, completely, ignoring the aimed pistols of the highly trained sheriffs. He orders me to pull the encrypted tablet out of my jacket right now. He demands an immediate, non-reversible wire transfer of exactly $2 million straight into an untraceable offshore account. He swears he will slice Monique open right in front of the authorities if the massive funds do not clear in the next 60 seconds. He tightens his grip on her neck, physically lifting her toes off the floorboard. He threatens to paint my expensive hardwood floors red with his own wife's blood. He demands I buy her life with my corporate fortune. He shouts that he has absolutely nothing left to lose. He claims that going to prison for murder is no different than returning to the pathetic, impoverished existence I just condemned him to. He presses the cold steel harder into Monique's arm, drawing a thin, bright line of crimson blood. The sheriffs tighten their grips on their firearms, warning him that he is seconds away from a fatal police response. Tariq wildly dares them to shoot, using my daughter as a human shield to guarantee his own survival. I do not reach for my tablet. I do not negotiate with a cornered, violent animal. When I originally built my interstate logistics empire from the ground up, I learned very quickly to prepare for the absolute worst outcomes of human desperation. I understood perfectly that immense invisible wealth naturally attracts immense unpredictable violence. Years ago, during the primary renovation of this property, I secretly contracted a specialized military-grade architectural firm to heavily retrofit the entire ground floor of my home. I spent a small fortune installing dense remote-locking titanium security doors concealed seamlessly inside the drywall above every single major archway. I meticulously designed these hidden reinforced partitions specifically to isolate and trap dangerous intruders in segmented kill boxes until heavily armed authorities could properly secure the premises. I fully anticipated that one day a desperate parasite might attempt to take my life or my assets by brutal physical force. I built my home to function as an impenetrable fortress, entirely capable of neutralizing an active threat without firing a single shot. I refused to rely on standard alarm systems that merely alert the police after the damage is already done. I constructed a mechanical trap designed to completely break a man's physical momentum. I maintain absolute chilling eye contact with Tariq as he holds the blade to my daughter's skin. I slowly reach into the right pocket of my tailored tuxedo trousers. I withdraw a small matte black remote control. I do not issue a counter-demand. I do not say a single word. I simply press the central red button with my thumb. A loud mechanical siren blares sharply through the house, signaling the lockdown protocol. Heavy industrial gears grind into violent motion inside the ceiling directly above Tariq's head. Tariq flinches, glancing upward in a momentary panic as the thick plaster violently splits open. He involuntarily loosens his grip on Monique. She seizes the fraction of a second, driving her sharp elbow deeply into his ribs and stumbling violently forward into the main foyer. She clears the threshold just as massive solid titanium panels aggressively drop from the archways framing the kitchen. The primary steel door slams down with the brutal force of a guillotine, striking the floorboards with a deafening metallic crash. The heavy barrier instantly severs the kitchen from the foyer. Tariq is immediately sealed inside the room, completely isolated from his hostage, the armed sheriffs, and the main exit. He beats his bloody knuckles furiously against the impenetrable titanium surface, screaming like a rabid beast trapped in a steel cage. He realizes with dawning horror that he is locked securely inside a high-security vault with absolutely no possible avenue of escape. Through the thick, reinforced, bulletproof glass viewing slit embedded in the center of the door, I watch his panic rapidly evolve into pure, destructive insanity. He tears violently through the kitchen cabinets, desperately searching for a heavy tool to break the mechanism. He rips open the wooden doors beneath the stainless steel sink. He pulls out a large yellow can of highly flammable industrial lighter fluid. Tariq's eyes widen with a crazed, destructive realization as his fingers grip the yellow plastic bottle of lighter fluid. The heavy sloshing sound inside the container seems to fuel his rapid descent into complete madness. He rips the red cap off with his teeth, spitting the small piece of plastic onto the pristine marble floor. He squeezes the bottle aggressively, spraying a thick, foul-smelling stream of chemical accelerant across the custom mahogany cabinets. He swings his arm wildly, coating the stainless steel appliances, the hardwood flooring, and the expensive fabric of the window valances. The pungent fumes of the toxic liquid immediately fill the sealed kitchen, seeping into the enclosed ventilation system. Tariq reaches into the pocket of his ruined suit trousers and pulls out a silver butane lighter. His chest heaves with violent, erratic breaths as he stares at me through the reinforced glass viewing slit of the titanium door. He screams at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing fiercely off the heavy walls. He declares that if he cannot possess the wealth and status he believes he rightfully deserves, he will gladly reduce my entire estate to a pile of smoldering ashes. He aggressively boasts that my millions will burn right alongside him, destroying the legacy I spent my entire life building. He paces back and forth in the chemical-soaked room, brandishing the silver lighter like a weapon of ultimate victory. The heavy odor of the accelerant creates a highly volatile atmosphere, turning the kitchen into a massive unlit bomb. Tariq points a trembling finger at the thick glass separating us violently, promising that I will be forced to watch my absolute destruction. He operates under the fatal delusion that fire is an uncontrollable force that will finally bend me to his will. I stand perfectly still on the other side of the heavy titanium barrier, completely unbothered by his frantic theatrical display. I do not step back from the reinforced glass, and I do not break my cold, calculated eye contact. I slowly raise my hand and press a small silver button mounted on the wall panel directly beside the doorframe. This action engages the two-way intercom system wired seamlessly into the kitchen's recessed ceiling speakers. My voice filters into the sealed room, echoing with absolute clinical calm over his manic shouting. I deliberately inform Tariq that his grand destructive gesture is nothing more than another pathetic miscalculation in a long sequence of massive failures. I explain precisely that the kitchen he is currently attempting to incinerate is equipped with a state-of-the-art industrial-grade fire suppression system. I warn him that igniting that specific chemical accelerant inside a hermetically sealed environment will not result in the glorious, consuming inferno he envisions. I clearly state that the immediate atmospheric reaction will be far more painful and instantaneous than he can possibly comprehend. Tariq completely ignores my explicit factual warning. His towering arrogance and shattered pride absolutely refuse to accept defeat from the man he sought to completely ruin. He grips the silver lighter tightly in his sweating palm, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated spite. He locks eyes with me aggressively, flicks his thumb down on the ignition wheel, and strikes a bright, steady spark. He violently hurls the lit metal casing directly into the center of a massive puddle of accelerant pooled on the hardwood floor. The chemical reaction is instantaneous and ferocious. A towering wall of bright orange flames erupts with a deafening roar, hungrily consuming the oxygen in the room. The fire spreads aggressively across the soaked mahogany cabinets and races up the expensive curtains. The sheer, intense heat radiating from the blaze visibly warps the air inside the kitchen, turning the space into a blistering, chaotic inferno. Tariq lets out a triumphant, maniacal laugh, genuinely believing he has finally engineered a situation I cannot control. He raises his arms in victory, fully expecting the flames to breach the titanium door and consume the entire house. His triumphant laughter is completely blind to the reality of my meticulous preparation. Throughout the decades of building my interstate logistics empire, I faced numerous aggressive threats from desperate competitors and organized criminal syndicates. The most common tactic they employed to cripple a freight business was coordinated arson against vulnerable storage facilities. I countered that persistent threat by aggressively fortifying every single one of my massive commercial warehouses with elite military-grade fire suppression technology. I refused to let millions of dollars in valuable inventory burn because of a simple match. When I remodeled this primary residence, I specifically contracted the exact same commercial engineering firms to outfit my home. I bypassed standard residential water sprinklers, which cause extensive property damage. I explicitly installed a high-capacity, commercial-grade halon gas and fire-retardant foam system directly into the ceiling architecture of the kitchen. I treated my personal sanctuary with the exact same ruthless, paranoid efficiency that protected my corporate shipping docks. Tariq is not burning a standard suburban kitchen. He has actively ignited a fire inside a commercially regulated, automated suppression chamber designed to extinguish chemical blazes in fractions of a second. The advanced thermal sensors embedded in the kitchen ceiling register the extreme temperature spike within 2 seconds of ignition. The automated defense sequence triggers with devastating mechanical precision. A loud piercing alarm shrieks through the sealed room as a dozen high-pressure nozzles aggressively drop from the plaster. A massive, violently pressurized cloud of thick, fire-retardant foam and chemical suppression gas blasts downward with the force of an industrial explosion. The sheer velocity of the chemical discharge instantly suffocates the oxygen supply, completely killing the towering flames before they can even scorch the underlying wood. The thick, expanding foam slams directly into Tariq, knocking him violently backward onto the slippery floor. The dense chemical cloud completely blinds him, filling his lungs and eyes with a harsh, suffocating powder. His triumphant laughter instantly transforms into a pathetic, choking gasp as he thrashes blindly in the dense white fog. Outside the house, the wailing of multiple heavy sirens violently cuts through the quiet suburban night. Flashing red and blue lights illuminate the front windows as several tactical police units aggressively surround the perimeter of the estate. The county sheriffs standing in my foyer receive immediate confirmation through their radios. I press the remote control in my pocket, deactivating the magnetic lock on the titanium door. The heavy metal barrier slides smoothly open, revealing the smoke-filled, foam-drenched ruins of Tariq's final failure. The armed sheriffs immediately rush into the blinding mist. They grab Tariq by his ruined, foam-soaked suit, violently dragging his coughing, defeated body out into the foyer. They aggressively slam him against the wall and lock heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Tariq offers absolutely no resistance, utterly broken by his total humiliation. Monique watches her husband being physically hauled away by the authorities. She turns her tear-streaked face toward me, her eyes wide with manufactured terror and desperate vulnerability. She runs directly toward me with her arms outstretched, fully expecting me to embrace her and offer immediate, unconditional comfort. Monique closes the distance between us, burying her face directly into the lapel of my ruined tuxedo jacket. She wraps her arms tightly around my torso, her body heaving with exaggerated, highly theatrical sobs. The heavy metal doors of the kitchen remain locked open as the thick chemical foam slowly dissipates into the cool night air. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers wash aggressively across the manicured front lawn, painting the interior walls in harsh, chaotic strokes. A lead detective wearing a dark suit steps through the front door, his sharp eyes scanning the chaotic aftermath of the foiled arson attempt. He orders his uniformed officers to thoroughly secure the perimeter and secure the suspect in the back of a reinforced transport vehicle. Monique instantly pivots toward the authoritative voice. She detaches herself from my chest and rushes directly toward the detective. She throws herself into the role of the traumatized, innocent victim with absolute, chilling perfection. She hyperventilates, clutching her sequined evening gown, and completely throws her defeated husband to the wolves. She loudly claims to the detective that Tariq suffered a sudden, violent, psychotic break. She insists she had absolutely no prior knowledge of his malicious financial schemes or his sudden arson attempt. She points a trembling finger toward the police cruisers outside, stating that Tariq held her against her will and forced her to participate under the immediate threat of a brutal death. She cries heavy, entirely manufactured tears, begging the detective for permanent police protection from the monster she unknowingly married. The detective pulls a small notepad from his pocket, nodding sympathetically as he documents her frantic, carefully constructed lies. He assumes he is simply interviewing a terrified wife who barely survived a severe domestic hostage situation. He does not realize he is speaking to the primary architect of the entire criminal conspiracy. I step away from the ruined threshold of the kitchen and walk directly toward the detective. I do not offer a single word of comfort or validation to my daughter. I reach into the inner pocket of my jacket and retrieve a slim, heavily encrypted tablet. I tap the dark screen, instantly waking the device and accessing the secure offshore server holding the continuous feeds from my hidden surveillance network. I calmly inform the detective that he does not need to rely on the highly questionable testimony of a panicked witness to establish the concrete facts of tonight's events. I state that every single room in my home, including the private offices, is actively monitored by commercial-grade high-definition cameras equipped with highly sensitive audio recorders. Monique completely freezes. Her manufactured tears stop instantly, replaced by a rigid, paralyzing panic. I tap the screen again, bypassing the footage of the immediate arson attempt, and pull up a specific, archived video file recorded exactly 3 days ago in my private study. I hand the glowing tablet directly to the detective. I press play. The pristine digital footage shows Monique and Tariq sitting at my mahogany desk. The high-gain microphones pick up their voices with absolute, undeniable clarity. The detective watches closely as the digital version of Monique actively holds a stolen power of attorney document flat against the polished wood. She laughs out loud, a sharp, cruel sound, as she coaches Tariq on how to perfectly replicate the specific loops and angles of my official signature to illegally transfer my car titles and properties. The video continues, capturing her gleefully detailing the exact horrific nursing home where they plan to lock me away. She openly mocks my declining health, stating that a heavy dose of daily sedatives will keep me quiet while they liquidate my entire corporate empire. The detective watches the video in absolute grim silence. He witnesses Monique actively, eagerly orchestrating the massive financial fraud and the premeditated medical imprisonment of her own father. The undeniable digital evidence completely shatters her fragile, fabricated narrative of innocence. She is not a victim. She is the mastermind. Monique stares at this glowing screen of the tablet, her jaw slack with genuine horror. She has spent her entire life aggressively avoiding the consequences of her own malice. From her earliest years in elite private schools, she consistently blamed her teachers, her peers, and her circumstances for her own deliberate cruelty. Whenever she destroyed a friendship, stole from a classmate, or failed a basic academic standard, she immediately played the innocent victim, weeping openly to escape the principal's discipline. I spent decades quietly paying massive financial settlements, hiring elite defense attorneys, and aggressively cleaning up the catastrophic messes she left in her wake. I constantly shielded her from the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world, foolishly believing my immense wealth could somehow purchase her moral redemption. My endless financial protection merely empowered her darkest instincts. I taught her that she was entirely untouchable, that any crime could be erased with a carefully crafted lie and a large enough check. She genuinely believed she could throw Tariq into a federal prison and walk away with my millions completely unscathed. She never anticipated that the man who spent a lifetime protecting her would finally step aside and let the crushing weight of the law fall directly onto her shoulders. The lead detective hands the tablet back to me, his expression hardening into professional disdain. He turns his complete attention back to Monique. Her brief manufactured performance as the terrified hostage has entirely evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of a cornered criminal. The detective reaches toward his heavy tactical belt and unclasps his steel handcuffs. He recites her Miranda rights in a loud, commanding voice, detailing her immediate right to remain silent and her right to an attorney. Monique screams in absolute, unhinged denial. She thrashes violently against the officer, fighting wildly as he firmly spins her around and locks the cold steel tightly around her wrists. 2 uniformed deputies march her forcefully out the front door and down the stone steps. They push her roughly into the back of the same reinforced police cruiser, currently holding her defeated husband. She presses her face against the thick, reinforced glass of the police vehicle, screaming loud, incoherent insults into the cool night air. She calls me a vicious traitor, a heartless monster, and a terrible father. She violently demands that I immediately contact my corporate attorneys, drain my accounts, and post her multi-million-dollar bail before morning. She still fundamentally believes I will eventually cave to her tantrums and rescue her from the devastating consequences of her own actions. I stand silently on the front porch, bathed in the flashing red and blue emergency lights. I do not answer her frantic demands. I do not show a single ounce of regret, sorrow, or hesitation. I simply turn my back to the police cruisers, walk slowly through the shattered remains of my foyer, and firmly close the heavy front door. The massive legal battle to reclaim my assets is completely inevitable, but the immediate lethal threat inside my home has been entirely neutralized. 6 months pass with agonizing slowness, leading us directly into a sterile, windowless mediation room located on the 4th floor of the downtown county courthouse. The harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights cast long, unforgiving shadows across the polished mahogany conference table separating us. Monique sits directly across from me. She managed to secure a highly expensive bail bond just 2 weeks after her initial arrest, but the physical toll of her impending criminal trial is undeniable. Her expensive designer clothing hangs slightly loose on her frame, and her posture is rigidly defensive. She glares at me with pure, unadulterated venom, her eyes entirely devoid of any familial warmth, remorse, or basic human decency. Sitting stiffly beside her is a notoriously aggressive defense attorney, a man entirely famous throughout the city for turning simple domestic disputes into highly lucrative, drawn-out media spectacles. He slaps a thick, heavily tabbed leather binder onto the table with a loud, deliberate thud designed to startle us and establish immediate control of the room. He leans back in his expensive chair and loudly demands a massive multi-million-dollar financial settlement from my personal accounts. He boldly claims that Monique is the completely innocent victim of severe orchestrated emotional distress and malicious prosecution initiated entirely by my vindictive paranoia. He insists that her time spent in a county holding cell caused irreparable psychological damage that requires immediate heavy financial compensation. He offers a thinly veiled extortion attempt, promising to quietly drop this entirely fabricated, frivolous countersuit if I simply pull out my checkbook and write a blank check right now. He expects me to surrender my hard-earned wealth to purchase my peace of mind. The defense lawyer leans heavily across the conference table, attempting to utilize his physical size and booming voice to establish absolute dominance in the small, claustrophobic room. He speaks rapidly, his tone dripping with manufactured outrage as he details exactly how he plans to utterly destroy me. He promises to initiate a brutal, highly publicized civil trial that will deliberately consume years of my life and drain millions in unnecessary legal fees. He aggressively threatens to selectively leak heavily edited, completely out-of-context audio clips from the night of the incident, directly to the most vicious tabloid press outlets in the state. He paints a terrifying, vivid picture of the incoming media storm. He claims that high society blogs, local news anchors, and ruthless financial journalists will absolutely feast on his fabricated narrative of domestic abuse. He intends to frame me publicly as a cruel, tyrannical billionaire father who maliciously framed his own innocent, defenseless daughter solely to protect his obsessive hoarding of wealth. He insists that the sheer volume of negative press will cause my corporate board of directors to panic and force a vote of no confidence. He vividly describes my company stock prices plummeting, my major international investors fleeing, and my pristine, decades-old corporate reputation being entirely dragged through the mud for cheap public entertainment. He points a manicured finger directly at my face, guaranteeing that my legacy will be defined entirely by family cruelty unless I pay his massive extortion fee immediately. Beside me, Mr. Holloway sits perfectly, impossibly still. My lead corporate attorney does not interrupt the arrogant tirade. He does not object to the blatant threats, and he does not shift his posture in his chair. He simply allows the aggressive defense lawyer to completely exhaust his breath and dig a massive, inescapable legal hole for his own client. Holloway's absolute silence is a highly calculated, lethal tactic. I mirror his stillness perfectly, watching the desperate lawyer flail against an immovable wall. The defense attorney's entire aggressive strategy relies fundamentally on one massive, fatal assumption. He genuinely believes that I deeply fear public scandal and social ruin. This is a fundamental, catastrophic miscalculation of my character. Decades ago, when I initially built my interstate freight and logistics empire from the absolute ground up, I did not rely on polite country club handshakes or favorable mentions in superficial high society columns. I built my massive wealth entirely on concrete, undeniable physical assets. My fortune is firmly rooted in vast fleets of heavy diesel trucks, massive steel distribution warehouses, and ironclad, unbreakable commercial shipping contracts. I never once cared about the fragile, shifting opinions of the city's wealthy elite, and I certainly do not care about the fleeting outrage of anonymous internet tabloids. Threats of social isolation and public embarrassment hold absolutely zero leverage over a man who constructed his entire kingdom in the dirt. The grease and the toxic diesel fumes of the commercial shipping yards. The arrogant lawyer sitting across from me is actively threatening a ghost, desperately trying to exploit a vulnerability that simply does not exist within my psychological makeup. The aggressive defense lawyer finally finishes his loud, threatening tirade. He crosses his arms confidently over his chest and leans back wearing a smug, victorious grin. He clearly expects me to visibly panic, consult frantically with my counsel, and immediately agree to his outrageous financial demands. Instead, the sterile mediation room remains cloaked in heavy, suffocating silence. Mr. Holloway slowly and smoothly reaches down to his side. He casually unclasps the heavy brass latches of his leather briefcase, the sharp metallic clicks echoing loudly in the quiet room. He reaches inside and retrieves a single crisp piece of heavy cardstock. He places it on the polished mahogany and slides it effortlessly across the long table. The document stops directly in front of the arrogant defense attorney. Holloway finally speaks, his voice radiating cold, absolute professional authority. He informs the opposing counsel that the document he is currently staring at is an officially sealed federal indictment. He explains that it details a specific, highly illegal $50,000 wire fraud operation executed against my corporate accounts exactly 3 months prior to the violent incident at my home. Holloway calmly and methodically details how a joint federal and private forensic bank trace unequivocally proves that the stolen corporate funds bypassed Tariq's accounts entirely. The irrefutable digital trail, complete with matching IP addresses and forged signature authorizations, shows the money flowing directly into a hidden, heavily encrypted offshore account, solely owned, established, and operated by Monique. The defense lawyer stops talking instantly. The smug color completely drains from his face as his eyes rapidly scan the federal seal and the devastating list of felony charges. He slowly turns his head to look at his client, realizing instantly that Monique lied to him entirely about her legal exposure. Monique stares blankly at the heavy paper. The sheer crushing gravity of federal wire fraud charges completely annihilates her remaining defiance. She suddenly realizes that her fabricated countersuit for emotional distress is entirely worthless. The immediate threat of a minor civil dispute vanishes completely, replaced by the terrifying, undeniable reality that she is actively facing 20 consecutive years in a federal penitentiary. The arrogant defense attorney does not say a single word for a long, agonizing minute. He picks up the heavy cardstock detailing the federal wire fraud indictment and reads every single line with surgical precision. He is a predator who makes his living exploiting weakness, and he instantly recognizes that his client possesses absolutely zero leverage. He does not bluff when the federal government is involved. He meticulously aligns the edges of the document, places it back on the mahogany table, and pushes it away from him as if the paper itself is radioactive. He turns his head slowly toward Monique. The blustering, theatrical bravado he displayed moments ago is entirely gone, replaced by a cold, transactional detachment. He informs her in a flat, clinical tone that he was retained solely to litigate a civil emotional distress claim. He explicitly states that he does not handle federal felony fraud defense, and that his firm will not be dragged into an unwinnable battle against the United States Department of Justice. Monique stares at him, her mouth opening and closing in silent shock, as she realizes her expensive attack dog is actively abandoning her. He reaches across the table, gathers his thick leather binder, and snaps the brass locks of his briefcase shut. The sharp metallic clicks echo like gunshots in the sterile room. He looks down at his former client with absolute professional apathy. He advises her to shut her mouth, stop playing games, and immediately accept whatever deal her father is about to offer. He tells her it is the only viable path keeping her out of a federal penitentiary. He stands up, straightens his tailored suit jacket, and walks out of the mediation room without looking back, leaving Monique entirely isolated and defenseless. The heavy wooden door clicks shut behind the retreating lawyer, leaving a suffocating vacuum in the room. Mr. Holloway does not miss a beat. He smoothly reaches back into his briefcase and withdraws a slender stack of heavily stapled legal documents. He slides them across the polished mahogany directly into the space the defense attorney just vacated. He speaks with absolute, unrelenting authority, presenting the final non-negotiable terms of my mercy. He informs Monique that she is currently holding an irrevocable, airtight renunciation of inheritance. By signing the bottom line, she completely and permanently surrenders any future legal claim to my corporate empire, my physical properties, my trust funds, and my personal estate. She will be legally severed from my financial legacy forever. Furthermore, Holloway explains the criminal component of the arrangement. Monique must formally plead guilty to a lesser, state-level charge of accessory to financial fraud regarding Tariq's initial real estate scam. She will accept a binding sentence of 5 consecutive years of strictly monitored probation. She will surrender her passport, submit to routine financial audits, and remain under the constant suffocating supervision of the state. In exchange for her complete capitulation, I will permanently withhold the devastating federal wire fraud evidence from the district attorney. Holloway makes it entirely clear that this is a singular expiring offer. If she attempts to negotiate, if she hesitates, or if she sheds a single manufactured tear, the deal is instantly revoked. The federal indictment will be transmitted to the authorities before she even reaches the courthouse lobby. She will trade a lifetime of mandated poverty and strict probation for 20 years behind federal bars. Monique stares at the thick stack of paper, her chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths. The brutal reality of her situation crushes the last remnants of her lifelong arrogance. She is no longer fighting for millions of dollars or a luxury penthouse. She is fighting for her basic physical freedom. She realizes I have meticulously boxed her into a corner where her only option for survival is absolute unconditional surrender. The immense untouchable wealth she believed was her birthright has been entirely stripped away, replaced by the grim, terrifying prospect of a criminal record and permanent financial ruin. I sit across from her, my posture perfectly still, watching her process the complete destruction of her lifelong entitlement. For decades, her mother Loretta shielded her from the harsh consequences of her malicious actions. Loretta possessed an infinite destructive capacity for forgiveness, constantly begging me to bail Monique out of trouble, to pay off her debts, and to sweep her cruelties under the rug. On her deathbed, Loretta held my hand and wept, begging me to somehow save Monique from herself. She finally realized that our endless financial protection had mutated our daughter into a ruthless, empathy-void parasite. I spent years after Loretta's passing trying to fulfill that dying wish through patience and endless financial support. I failed completely. I finally understand the brutal truth. You cannot save a drowning person who is actively trying to pull you under the water. The only possible salvation left for Monique is to hit the absolute concrete bottom, forcing her to face the severe, unmitigated legal and financial consequences of her own actions is the only way to break her destructive cycle. I am honoring my late wife's final request by completely destroying the monster we accidentally created. Monique's hands shake violently as she reaches across the table. Her manicured fingers hover over the black ink pen resting beside the documents. She slowly lifts her head and looks directly across the mahogany table into my eyes. She is desperately searching for the soft, endlessly forgiving father she has successfully manipulated her entire life. She searches for a flicker of hesitation, a hint of paternal weakness, or a final desperate plea for family unity. She finds absolutely nothing. She meets a gaze of cold, immovable stone. My eyes reflect zero pity and zero regret. The absolute finality of my silence shatters her last remaining illusion. She realizes with crushing certainty that the endless well of my paternal forgiveness has permanently run dry. She picks up the heavy pen. Her breathing is shallow and rapid as she presses the metallic nib against the thick paper. She signs her name on the first document, her signature jagged and frantic. She flips the page and signs the next systematically, legally, erasing herself from my entire existence. She completes the final signature, drops the pen, and pushes the stack of papers back across the table toward Mr. Holloway. He calmly collects the documents, places them securely inside his leather briefcase, and fastens the brass locks. The absolute severance is complete. Monique stands up from the table. She does not say a single word. She turns and walks stiffly toward the heavy wooden door, her shoulders slumped under the invisible, crushing weight of her new reality. She opens the door and steps out into the busy courthouse hallway, disappearing into the crowd. She walks out of the room entirely irrevocably erased from my legacy, leaving me sitting in the quiet mediation room with my empire entirely secure. I step out of the sleek town car and walk slowly up the wide, sweeping driveway toward my front door. The cool morning air carries the sharp, clean scent of recent rain and fresh landscaping, a welcome contrast to the bitter stench of chemical accelerant that recently choked this property. I unlock the heavy oak door and step into the grand foyer. The chaotic, violent destruction that plagued this space just weeks ago has been entirely erased. Following Tariq's unhinged arson attempt and his subsequent humiliating arrest by tactical police units, I hired an elite, highly discreet team of private contractors to completely restore the estate. They worked around the clock, operating with the exact same ruthless, uncompromising efficiency I applied to building my logistics empire. The shattered crystal from the ruined dining room centerpiece has been meticulously replaced by a custom-commissioned bronze sculpture, heavy and permanently grounded. The deeply gouged hardwood floors have been sanded down seamlessly, repaired and polished to a flawless, mirror-like shine. The pervasive, toxic odor of fire-retardant foam is completely gone. In its place is the crisp, sharp aroma of fresh paint and rich lemon polish. I walk methodically through the ground floor, inspecting the pristine walls and the perfectly aligned mahogany cabinets in the kitchen. The lethal titanium security doors have retracted silently into the ceiling, hiding their absolute stopping power behind flawless drywall. I make my way up the grand staircase toward my master suite. The catastrophic demolition damage Tariq inflicted on my bedroom walls during his frantic, pathetic search for a hidden safe has been masterfully reconstructed. The room is immaculate, radiating an absolute undisturbed tranquility. I walk over to the large bay window and look out over the sprawling, manicured grounds of my estate. The house finally feels completely clean. The lingering, parasitic energy of Tariq and Monique's immense greed has been scrubbed from the very foundation. The physical wounds of their invasion are permanently healed. I leave the quiet bedroom and walk down the carpeted hall to my private study. I sit in my heavy leather armchair and wake the glowing screen of my desktop monitor. Mr. Holloway has successfully forwarded the final comprehensive financial audits detailing the absolute liquidation of Monique and Tariq's fraudulent existence. I open the heavily encrypted files and carefully review the concrete numbers. The illicit funds they generated from the hasty illegal sale of my vintage Mustang have been completely clawed back. My aggressive corporate attorneys tracked the international wire transfers, froze the receiving accounts, and seized the cash before Tariq could move a single cent into his offshore havens. The stolen money currently sits securely in a high-yield holding trust under my direct, unyielding control. I scroll down to the next dense legal document. It outlines the final devastating foreclosure of their luxurious downtown penthouse. Because I successfully purchased their defaulted primary debt, I possess the absolute legal authority to liquidate the property at my exact discretion. I did not hold on to the apartment out of spite or sentimentality. I immediately placed the penthouse on the aggressive luxury real estate market and sold it to an international cash buyer within 72 hours. The rapid sale generated a massive, undeniable surplus of liquid capital. I stare at the final balance glowing brightly on the monitor. It is a staggering multi-million-dollar amount of money, a small fortune born entirely from their malicious, unchecked greed and their spectacular failure to outsmart me. They intended to use these exact funds to purchase my physical imprisonment, bribe corrupt medical professionals, and fund a lifetime of unearned luxury. Instead, their overwhelming arrogance simply enriched the very man they plotted to destroy. This money represents the physical manifestation of their total defeat. It is the blood money of a failed, pathetic coup, and I entirely refuse to absorb it into my own legitimate corporate accounts. Integrating their tainted cash into my clean logistics empire would feel like a profound, unacceptable contamination. The wealth needs to be entirely repurposed, stripped of its malicious origin, and deployed with absolute ruthless precision. I sit back in my chair, interlacing my fingers, and carefully consider the immense power resting in my holding trust. I realize exactly what must be done to permanently balance the scales. I look away from the glowing monitor, my mind drifting back 40 years to the deafening, brutal environment of the commercial freight docks. Long before the customized tuxedos and the sprawling corporate logistics empire, I worked gruelingly long shifts loading massive steel containers alongside men whose bodies were entirely broken by decades of unforgiving manual labor. I vividly remember an older, hardened foreman named Silas. He mentored me when I was a reckless, arrogant 20-year-old kid trying to prove my worth. Silas worked every single day to provide for a large, demanding family, literally breaking his back to secure their financial future. When Silas finally retired, his own nephew ruthlessly manipulated his failing eyesight, tricked him into signing over his modest pension, and threw him entirely onto the street. I watched a proud, hard-working man completely destroyed by the predatory greed of his own bloodline. He had absolutely zero resources to fight back and zero access to the elite legal defense required to reclaim his stolen dignity. I swore then that I would never allow myself to be rendered defenseless. I know exactly what this money must be used for. I pick up my desk phone and dial a direct unlisted number for a prominent African-American legal charity operating in the heart of the city. The organization is highly renowned for fighting vicious, uncompromising courtroom battles on behalf of marginalized citizens who completely lack the financial leverage to defend themselves. The executive director answers the line on the second ring. I do not offer polite pleasantries or engage in casual, time-wasting conversation. I speak with absolute, undeniable authority. I inform her that I am immediately transferring a massive sum of liquid capital to her organization. I dictate the exact non-negotiable terms of my aggressive donation. The money is not to be absorbed into their general operating budget or used for administrative overhead. I demand she use the entire staggering sum to establish a permanent, heavily armed legal defense fund specifically dedicated to protecting elderly victims of familial financial abuse. I mandate that the fund will provide ruthless, elite corporate attorneys to vulnerable seniors whose own children are actively attempting to steal their homes, drain their hard-earned pensions, or force them into fraudulent medical commitments. The director is momentarily speechless, completely overwhelmed by the sheer unprecedented magnitude of the incoming wire transfer. I end the call immediately before she can offer her profound gratitude. I turn back to my computer monitor and open the highly secure banking portal. I type in the charity's routing number. I authorize the complete transfer of the seized funds, emptying the holding trust entirely. I sign the digital authorization with a steady, unflinching hand. The screen flashes green, confirming the transaction is finalized. The tainted wealth is instantly cleansed. The legal battle is inevitable, but the immediate threat is neutralized. The afternoon sun bathes the back patio of my estate in a rich, warm light. The harsh, chaotic energy that recently infected this property is entirely gone, replaced by a profound, undisturbed stillness. I sit comfortably in my heavy custom-built cedar chair. The elite contractors meticulously repaired the slight structural damage to the patio deck, leaving the wood perfectly sanded and sealed against the elements. I hold a thick ceramic mug of black coffee in my hands. The dark, bitter liquid grounds me in the present moment, a simple luxury I can finally enjoy without interruption. The air surrounding the estate is perfectly still. The typical ambient noises of the exclusive suburban neighborhood seem entirely blocked by the heavy iron gates at the end of my driveway. There are absolutely no impending threats lurking in the shadows of my home. There are no frantic, demanding phone calls ringing from my private line. There are no false, predatory smiles waiting for me inside the foyer. The suffocating, toxic obligations that dictated my schedule for the past decade have been completely severed. The sprawling, manicured lawn stretches out before me in perfect geometric precision. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, feeling the heat radiate through my chest. For the first time in years, my muscles are completely relaxed. I am not bracing for an explosive argument. I am not mentally calculating the immense cost of elite defense attorneys or private security contractors. The heavy metallic dread that permanently settled in my stomach during Tariq and Monique's invasion has entirely evaporated. My estate is once again a fortress of absolute tranquility. The sharp scent of blooming jasmine drifts across the patio, completely masking the bitter, lingering memory of chemical accelerants and deceit. I have successfully reclaimed the fundamental sanctity of my own home. I lower my ceramic mug and fix my gaze on the long, empty stretch of the paved driveway. The stark emptiness of that space serves as a permanent physical reminder of the heavy toll this war demanded. I feel the profound, undeniable weight of cutting my only daughter completely out of my life. Erasing my own flesh and blood from my legacy, my estate, and my daily existence is not a casual or painless decision. A cold, residual grief periodically attempts to surface when I remember the innocent child she once was. However, that fleeting sorrow is vastly immediately outweighed by the undeniable absolute peace of my reclaimed dignity. I refuse to mourn the vicious, entitled monster she actively chose to become. I understand with absolute clinical clarity that a quiet life is not a given right. It is a rare, expensive luxury earned exclusively through the enforcement of hard, unforgiving boundaries. Tolerating abuse in the name of familial loyalty is a fatal error I will never repeat. I traded a lifetime of financial extortion and emotional manipulation for the permanent security of my own sanity. I shift my weight in the cedar chair and slowly close my eyes. I actively savor the profound, uninterrupted silence wrapping around the estate. It is the heavy, victorious silence of a man who faced a ruthless, calculated siege, stood his ground against impossible odds, and successfully defended his fortress against the very people who maliciously sought to burn it down. The massive legal battles are fully settled. The illicit wealth has been entirely repurposed to protect the vulnerable. The tainted legacy is broken. I breathe in the warm afternoon air, knowing with absolute certainty that I have finally permanently cleaned my house.